I'm Lee Badgett. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and also teach in the School of Public Policy. I'm a labor economist, and I have been studying discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity for about 25 years now. I got interested in this subject because I had studied race and sex discrimination when I was in graduate school. When I got out of grad school, the newest version of the LGBT rights movement was heating up, and it became clear that there were some odd stereotypes, weird stereotypes about what it meant to be LGBT, LGB in particular, which was basically that gay men and lesbians were this affluent group of people, well-educated, nice houses, good cars, and that they were not people who faced discrimination. Now, I knew from studying discrimination that actually when you face discrimination, you usually are less well off economically, so that didn't make any sense to me. That sent me off on a decades-long journey to try to find data where I could study what the economic status of LGBT people was. And what I found was that it's actually not true that LGBT people are an affluent group, but in fact it's just the opposite. That in many ways there are inequalities that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people face just because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The main one that I've studied has to do with employment discrimination, and I've also looked and studied marriage equality and did a lot of work on that issue for a long time, showing that not being allowed to marry put LGBT people and their families in an unequal position, unable to get the kinds of benefits that supported other families. And that, in fact, our whole economy would have done better had LGBT people had the right to marry a same-sex partner. So I've done work on that issue. Now, of course, same-sex couples have the right to marry in every state. And so that's now something that we're studying about the impact of marriage and how it has shaped the families of LGBT people. The employment discrimination work that I've done asks, do LGBT people face biases in the workplace from their coworkers or from their bosses? And we see lots of evidence that they do. When you ask LGBT people, they say, yes, I have been discriminated against. When you study their wages and compare people who have the same kinds of education and occupation, age, experience, live in the same kinds of places, when you compare people who look the same in those ways, but only differ being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, what you find is that the LGBT people tend to earn less, not more, than the heterosexual people if they're men. If they're women, it's kind of interesting. The women who are lesbian or bisexual earn more than heterosexual women do. That's partly because we're comparing lesbian and bisexual women to the lowest paying group in our economy. That would be heterosexual women. And the lesbian and bisexual women work more hours, more weeks. They work in jobs that have more men in them. All these things will actually help increase their wages to some extent. So the lesbian and bisexual women don't look like they're facing discrimination because of sexual orientation if you look at them that way. But if you look at them a third way, sending out resumes of people who are, some of whom are heterosexual and some of whom are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, what you find is that the LGB applicants are less likely to be invited to a job interview. So we see that there's definite evidence that even both gay and bisexual men and lesbian and bisexual women face disparities in the labor market related to discrimination. Some of the recent work I've done has been to look at the charges of discrimination that people file. And we find that thousands of people every year file discrimination charges against their employers at more or less the same rates that people of color do in terms of race discrimination charges, or that women do in terms of sex discrimination charges. So it's clear that our labor markets, our employers, are discriminating sometimes against LGBT people. So it's important to study policies that will help to mitigate or end that kind of discrimination. One of the other projects that I'm doing has to do with poverty in the LGBT community. Here again, we see that, although we think about LGBT people as being mostly middle class when we study them in those studies of their earnings, there still are many people at the low end of the economic spectrum. And in fact, some groups of LGBT people are more likely to be poor than heterosexual people. So transgender people and bisexual people in particular have much higher rates of poverty than do heterosexual people. And some lesbians and gay men also face an extra risk of poverty. So it's very important that when we think about public policies, that we're thinking about those that will be broadly applicable, that will actually bring up LGBT people as well as non-LGBT people. And finally, I've been studying some of these issues in other countries, doing some research in China on labor market discrimination, studying the economic cost of homophobia in places like India and Indonesia, and in fact, much more broadly. What we know as economists is that discrimination is harmful not just for the individuals who face the discrimination, but it's also harmful for societies as a whole. So when LGBT people are denied a job, or when they face harassment in education that leads them to drop out or to get lower grades, or when the discrimination causes their health to be poor, creating anxiety and depression, all of those factors will actually hold back what they can contribute to our economy. So it's very important to put this in the bigger picture as well and understand that the inequality and discrimination, stigma, these are all things that are bad for everybody in our economy.